All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Banus Lifter podcast. Today we're going to be talking about Ozempic and other GLP-1 drugs. We're going to talk about what they actually do. We're going to talk about how they're going to change the fitness industry forever. I'm going to talk a little bit about what this means for my career in the future, and also I want to talk about how your training should change if you are using one of these drugs. Now, I want a quick disclaimer at the beginning. I am not an expert in these drugs. I've done a lot of research for this podcast, and I feel like I have a good understanding of how they work, but I am not an expert, and I am also not your doctor. So I don't want you using this podcast to decide Mark made them sound cool, I'm going to take. I don't want any of that. Okay. If you think these drugs are right for you, you should talk to your doctor first and not use this podcast to decide. This is just about what they do, how they're going to change the fitness world. This is not me saying you should take it or you should not take it. I'm not an expert in these drugs. I'm also not your doctor. I am going to leave a reference list at the end of in the show notes of this podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, I'll put it in the caption area for YouTube. If you are curious on how I got to the conclusions that I did, and because I did a lot of research for this podcast, so if you are curious on the research you want to see for yourself, absolutely, it's all there. I'm probably going to add more as I learn more, and that'll be free for you to check out. There's no cost or anything. It's just an open source. You can check it out, take a look at all the links, make conclusions on your own if you decide you want to do that. So let's talk about what they actually do. So there's different brand names, but basically we're talking about semaglutide and tirzepatide, which are GLP-1 agonist drugs. So you might know them as Ozempic or Wegovy for semaglutide, or you might know them as Mounjaro, or I believe the weight loss version is called Zepbound. Don't quote me on that, but we're talking about semaglutide and tirzepatide. These are the two drugs. Depending on where you live, they might go under different names, different brands, things like that, but this is what we're talking about. And the main thing they do is they work as a GLP-1 agonist. They work on your receptors that basically increase the amount of satiety hormones you have in your body. So this is something that you already do actually, but they increase that effect, and it really works as an appetite suppressant or an appetite modulator, and delays gastric emptying. So what this kind of means is that you're full quicker, you're full for longer, and what people have noticed is they just can't eat as much food as they did in the past, or they don't want to eat as much food as they did in the past because they're just getting full a lot quicker than they used to. In talking to people behind the scenes, I also had a lot of comments about reducing food noise, and kind of what I mean by that is that in the evening, maybe you used to feel something sweet or savory at the end of your day, or you always crave chips or craved, in my case, I crave chocolate all the time. People on these drugs, that noise seems to decrease, or suddenly it's not as interesting to you as it used to be. So that's something that I think is interesting as well, is that not only are you eating less, but the cravings that you had for certain food are going away. This is not everybody, but this has been something that people have talked about. There are other, let's call them benefits, that people have noticed shown up. I want to talk about these ones specifically because there's been conversations about do these drugs have other benefits beyond appetite suppression, and in my opinion that's still kind of early stages and we don't know for sure, and I'm not informed enough in that scenario to talk about that. So for now, appetite suppressant, possibly reduce food noise, you're fuller quicker, and you're full for much longer. And about 12% of the US have used a GLP-1 medication at some point. Either they are currently on GLP-1s or they have used them in the past. And these drugs are only getting more common. As kind of an example, tirzepatide in 2022 made about $500 million in sales, a little bit less than that. In 2023, it made $5 billion. So that's a 10x in 1 year. These drugs are becoming more popular very quickly. And I think one of the reasons why is that these drugs work better than diet and exercise interventions for weight loss and weight maintenance. This was pretty clear in the research when they were looking at comparing these drugs to lifestyle interventions. And by life, usually it means exercise routine, nutrition regimen, sometimes like some kind of counseling, or sometimes it was like just a placebo. But in like pretty much every study I could find, these drugs were not only more effective, but like significantly more effective than putting people on lifestyle interventions. So I think that's why these drugs have become so popular. Is it does seem that they are more effective than other interventions that we have had in the past. People are noticing that, they're getting more interested. It also kind of started with like a lot of celebrities took them over COVID, and they started to notice like, hey, like this actor lost a ton of weight over COVID, and they kind of admitted they were using these drugs. And I think that's what kind of increased the popularity of like, now people talk about them all the time. I know other doctors have said like, I have so many appointments now where people are asking about like, should I be on these drugs? So I want to talk about them because I think they're only gonna get more popular. People want to use them, and they're gonna change the fitness world forever because of what they do. So I do want to bust some myths though that I've seen online. Some influencers unfortunately did not do their research on this, and they're talking about it like they have. And so these were some common myths that I saw online that I just want to stop right now. So the first one is that you can eat whatever you want. So this is not how the drug works. Some people will claim that the drugs will increase your metabolic rate so that you can just eat whatever you want and you won't absorb the calories. Not true. So these drugs, there's no reason to believe that these drugs do that. They suppress your appetite and you eat less. That is like the effect of these drugs, essentially. So don't fall for that. It's not like I can take these drugs and have like 2 pizzas a day. Like, no, none of those. Like, that's not true. True. Number 2, there are no studies on Ozempic and weight loss without diabetes. So these drugs were meant for type 2 diabetics, maybe type 1, type 2 for sure. And people have said like, well, we don't know what they do with people who don't have diabetes. Again, this is not true. I can feel free to please look at the research that I have listed. There are many studies that have studied specifically semaglutide and tirzepatide in people without diabetes. Thousands of many studies, thousands, tens of thousands of participants with follow-ups 1 to 2 years later, taking a look at the results. They have been studied for sure. So that's not true. We do have a very good amount of research on them, and we're only going to have more in the future, especially as people, again, are becoming more interested in these drugs. We do have research on them. 3, nature's Ozempic. I'm seeing this a lot in the fitness, like health and wellness world, about like, well, don't take Ozempic. Like you can take, insert berberine, apple cider vinegar, like whatever, like a bunch of other things. That's like, well, you don't have to do that. You can just take this and you'll get the same effect. This is just not true. The effect of these drugs are significantly more than like any household item you might have or any supplement over the counter. If you could just take berberine and get the same effect as Ozempic without any of the side effects, we would all know about it, and it would be something that would exist in like most households. So no, this is not like, there is no nature's Ozempic. It does not exist. The effects of the things they're talking about are mild to non-existent. So definitely don't fall for that. Myth number 4 is that everyone should be on Ozempic. I've seen this with some, again, like health fitness influencers that like, basically this is a drug that we should all take. And this is not true. There's lots of good reasons not to be on these drugs. 1, you might not have weight loss goals. So just full on, you don't need them because this is like not a priority for you. I would say like people with eating disorder history, this would also probably not work well with. Like if you're a person who already has kind of a weird relationship or bad relationship with food, adding a appetite suppressant into your life, especially a very strong one, is not a good combination for people with disordered eating or eating disorders. That's kind of an example of like someone who probably should not be on the drugs. I also want to say is that like there are about, I think I said the number was 14%, but you're looking at like 10 to 14% of people, the drugs don't work. Like they're just non-responders. They take them, they went to their doctor, and then for whatever reason they don't work as well. And so for them, even if you have a weight loss goal and you're on these drugs, you don't really get the benefits. So for those people, they shouldn't be on them because it's no pros, all cons. And there are other people as well who shouldn't be on these drugs. This is again why I'm saying, like, don't use this podcast to say, yeah, I'm going to take it, like Mark, convinced me or whatever. Like, talk to your doctor. There are people who should not be on these drugs. This is not. We should not just be having like an over-the-counter tirzepatide that like everyone should take. Like nothing along those lines. Like there are good reasons not to be on these drugs. Some of these reasons are also like the side effects, which I want to talk about because it's not all great. Like there are. One is like GI distress, vomiting, nausea. For a lot of people who take these drugs, they seem to be mild to moderate in the studies, but they can be quite severe and can be severe enough to basically like the drugs are not for you. Some of these side effects showed up at the beginning of using the drugs, and then people noticed as they use the drugs more and more that they disappeared. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But they're there, and that's something to keep in mind. Potential thyroid risk. So I was hesitant to put this on the list because we've only seen this in the rat studies. And actually, when we measured it in humans, it did not seem to be the case. And there's something to be said about that. The thyroid of rats is not actually the same as the thyroid of humans. And so while it increases cancer risk in rats, we don't have studies right now that I could find that thyroid cancer is more of an issue in humans. We could study it more and find out later, but as of right now, I don't think that's a claim we can make, but it is something that has been said, and there even was a label on the medication about this concern, but when we look more into it, it seems like it was found in rat studies and not in human studies. Stopping the medication is also difficult. I think this is something that needs to be talked about, because I think some people will think, oh, I'll take these drugs, I'll get down to my, like, quote-unquote goal weight, and then I'll get off them, or I'll taper off of them. It doesn't seem super obvious on how you get off of these drugs, and a lot of doctors who prescribe these drugs will say, like, yeah, they're kind of on them indefinitely. Or if they stop using the medications, weight regain happens almost always. I think the number I saw was like about 2/3 weight regain. So let's say you were 300 pounds and you lost 60 pounds, so you got down to 240. If you stop using the medications, you'd be expected to go back up to 280 as kind of an example. And so like some of the medication is difficult if you want long-term weight loss maintenance, which means that a lot of people who are on these drugs could probably expect to be on them indefinitely, at least for now. And this is also a big concern because the drugs are expensive. The drugs, depending on it now, drug pricing is complicated in the US because it depends on like what your insurance will cover. A lot of insurances won't cover these. Are you a network? What state you're in? In Canada, it's probably cheaper, but again, varies from province to province. But like, I saw Mounjaro, the list price was, $1,300 on the high end. Maybe that isn't covered for you. That's a lot of money. I talked to someone who's with insurance. It still costs them like $600 a month as kind of an example. So like these are not cheap medications as of right now. Maybe that will change in the future. I know that's something that they're trying to work on, and they're trying to work on insurance covering these drugs for weight loss, but it seems that insurance companies are hesitant to cover these drugs unless you have diabetes. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Muscle loss and bone loss is something that's also worth considering. Now, the reason why in my slides here I put like an asterisk beside them was that we don't have reasons to believe the drug directly causes muscle loss and bone loss. That was not something that I could find. But when people lose a significant amount of weight, a good proportion of that tends to be muscle. Sometimes it can be bone loss as well. And so for people who are losing a lot of weight, especially quickly, that, I found a whole bunch of studies that showed that the weight that was lost was a combination of muscle mass and fat mass. So it was not just like 60 pounds fat, boom, like capillary muscle mass. Like some muscle loss was seen. Most studies showed it was still majority fat mass, but it was significant enough that people, like a concern of osteoporosis could come up. Sarcopenia, you want to keep that in mind as well, is that like if you lose weight, especially if you lose weight fast, muscle loss can be seen over time. I will say that muscle loss was not seen in every study that I saw, but the studies that had longer trials with larger sample sizes tend to show muscle loss, and the ones that had smaller sample sizes and the trial was shorter didn't show muscle loss as kind of a trend. So something to keep in mind. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on how you can minimize that, but it has been seen before, but I'm not blaming the drug directly. These are actually just common side effects of losing a lot of weight in general. So, and this is not an exclusive list, by the way. These are the ones that I saw that were the most common, the most discussed. But these are worth considering. Other things could happen as well. Okay, what this means for the fitness industry. So let's kind of talk about that. I work in the fitness space. These drugs are only going to become more popular as they improve. By improve, I mean they're more effective, fewer side effects, lower cost. These are kind of the goals of the future. This is kind of the expectation that in the next few years, more companies will have these drugs, which hopefully will bring costs down. Hopefully they have fewer side effects, and like the effect will be the same or more. We actually have seen big differences between tirzepatide and semaglutide, where semaglutide was like on average, let's call it like 15% weight loss, and then it would plateau, whereas tirzepatide at different doses can be anywhere in like the 17 to 25% weight loss rate, which is huge, and significantly outpaces every fitness and nutrition and diet situation. For that reason, trainers who are going to focus solely on weight loss are going to have a tough time. Like, that's just where we're at here. That, like, imagine a scenario. You're looking to lose weight. You have one person who, they're a trainer. They're like, oh yeah, you can work with me. You know, it could be $60 to $100 a session. You got to see me 3 to 4 times a week. You got to make time out of your day. Or you take this drug. Now, there is oral semaglutide. I don't know if there's oral tirzepatide. So there is a pill form. It's like you can take this drug, you'll actually see better results, and you don't have to go into the gym 3 or 4 times a week or hire a trainer to see weight loss. Now, this is not the situation I would like, but it's going to be clear that, like, if you're a trainer who just works in weight loss, a lot of people are going to be like, you know what, like, I'm just going to go to my doctor and get some glutide or tirzepatide. I'm not gonna go with you because you're a lot of work, a lot more effort, and it's just gonna make a lot of sense. Now, some people will choose both, and that's totally fair, but a lot of people will choose one or the other, and trainers who just focus on weight loss are going to have a tough time. Like, just straight up, we're already kind of seeing a lot of trainers demonize these drugs, not because they're against weight loss or anything, but because they're like, you know, you got to earn it, or like, well, what about the side effects? Or you'll never get off the drug. And like, we're already kind of seeing a lot of weight loss trainers notice that people are going a different route. Trainers will need to provide different reasons to train beyond just like decreasing the weight on the scale, because the drugs are, in people's mind, going to be like a better solution to that. So, in my opinion, I think we need more trainers to become strength coaches and emphasize non-weight loss benefits. Now, maybe you're like, wow, shocker, Mark came to the conclusion that what he does, strength coaching, should be like the norm. But I do think, I am biased towards that, but I do think that is going to have to become the norm, because if we're going to have people train, we're going to have to give them reasons to get into the gym other than just like lowering the weight on the scale, more than ever with these drugs. And so I think we're going to have more coaches, like, they're focused on muscle building, they're focused on strength coaching, and they're focused on the benefits of exercise outside of weight loss, because I think overall the fitness industry will lose the fight between training for weight loss versus taking the drug for weight loss. And I don't know if I have this in the research, but exercise as a tool to lose weight is not as effective as we might think. I know it seems counterintuitive, where you're like, yeah, you're burning more calories, so like that's going to result in more weight loss. When we test this out, the effect is pretty mild. It seems that your body will, you know, as you train more, you tend to eat slightly more calories to compensate for that. There's even research that your metabolic rate as you train more will actually go down. And so, like, every 100 calories you burn, I believe the number I saw was like about a 30% decrease. Like, so basically, you burn 100 calories, your basic metabolic rate will go down 30. So there's a 30% compensation. And in some people, they specifically noticed this in obese people, that number could be as high as 50. So trainers are going to have a different answer. We're going to have to change the focus. We still want people exercising. We still want people training, because training is very important for a lot of other reasons, as I've mentioned on the podcast. I don't know, like every episode I've ever done. But just the answer of like, yeah, come to me to like lose this weight or whatever, just not going to be the case. And so I think that's something that like we need to keep in mind in the fitness industry. I think a lot of people who sell fat loss burners are going to really suffer as well, because one, they never really work to begin with. And if you're going to compare it to like a shady supplement that might work, or a drug that does definitely seem to work, based on the research we have, they're going to lose. So fitness industry will need to shift its focus to be, in my opinion, more weight neutral. Which kind of brings me, because people have asked, like, well, okay, if these drugs exist more often, like, what does that mean for your career? Because and to be honest, like as a weight neutral coach, I don't think this is going to change a lot for me. Scenario one is the lifters I work with still don't have weight loss goals, so it's like we don't even talk about the drugs, because it's not, they want to get stronger for their kids, they want to be independent, they want to be healthier later in life, they want a sick deadlift, or they want their first pull up, like that. Ozempic doesn't change any of that. So scenario one is like I'm just doing my thing with the same kind of people who want a more weight neutral approach to training and don't want weigh-ins and before and afters and all that kind of jazz. Scenario two is they use the drug for weight loss, but now they're coming to me to build muscle and strength. And so instead of having this divide between like, well, should I have a weight loss goal or should I have a muscle building and strength goal, they're kind of just going to choose both. And like we mentioned, for the muscle loss and bone loss that exists, that can be minimized with resistance training. Excuse me. So if anything, like now those people who use the drug for weight loss, they're just going to come to me because they want to maintain their muscle mass. They still want to get stronger while on the drugs. And muscle mass is still really important. So I don't think this actually changes a lot for me and doesn't actually shift my focus. So I feel kind of lucky that a lot of trainers are being are worried about like how this will affect the fitness industry. But I think on my end, like I just don't think it will. I don't think it'll be a huge deal, at least for like my niche of the fitness industry. I do want to talk about like how this is going to change training. So one is that I think strength training is now non-negotiable. So I think for someone who isn't super into strength training, I would still want you to strength train, but maybe you feel like it's not something that you need in your life, or you're happy with your strength and amount of muscle mass. If you're on these drugs, I think that like option goes away if you want to be healthy. So if you just want to you truly just want the number on the scale to go down, you don't care about health, then maybe that's one thing. But if you want to lose weight and still be healthy, strength training regularly is going to have to exist in your life, at least a minimum of twice a week. Ideally more 30-minute workouts as like a minimum. You need strength training in your life if you want to decrease the amount of bone loss with these drugs, as well as decrease the amount of muscle mass. And I think you also need emphasis on strength training and muscle building across the body. So depending on who I work with, we might prioritize other muscle groups because it works better with their goals. Kind of an example of this is like if someone wants to get their first pull-up, it doesn't have any lower body goals, we might prioritize upper body training over lower body training. I think with these drugs, you're going to have to prioritize across the body, because wherever you don't train for is going to be the place that you lose muscle. And that doesn't mean that your workouts need to be crazy long or anything along those lines, but I think the idea of being a specialist is kind of going to go out the window if you're on these drugs. At a minimum, you should have some training across the body. If you're training twice a week, this could be 2 full body workouts. If you're training 3 times a week, this could be upper, lower, and then a full body. 4 times a week could be 2 lower bodies, 2 upper bodies. But you need to strength train across the whole body. And I want to say as well, even if you only have strength goals, but you're on these drugs, I think you also need to make muscle building a priority in your training. So there's some people that I work with who they don't care about muscle building, they just want to get stronger. And I'm like, cool, no worries. Like, we'll just focus on the strength aspect. If you build muscle, you build muscle, but it's not the priority. I think on these drugs, you should have training that also emphasizes muscle building, because muscle loss and bone loss is such a concern. And I only saw one study on this, so I'm hesitant to mention it, but there was a study that saw that muscle loss was seen, but strength loss wasn't. I would like to see more research on that before having like a clear understanding, but it's important to understand that like if you are on these drugs and you only have strength goals, you should probably also make muscle building a strength goal as well, especially as you're decreasing in the weight before you've plateaued. So I could probably do a whole episode on like what this training might look like, but training is going to change. You might notice decreases in strength and hypertrophy anyways, but this is going to minimize the amount of strength. I actually do know one person who, as they lost weight, still got stronger because they were strength training regularly. So that's pretty cool. Seems that like if you can keep strength training as you're losing weight, you might be able to keep the muscle mass that you have, keep the strength that you have, and in some cases actually keep getting stronger. So that's what I have for you today. This took a lot of research, and I'm happy to share as well. I think any influencer online who says like I did my research on this should be able to like provide the research. So I'm curious on your thoughts and if you have used these drugs, your experience. This is definitely not everything that we could talk about with these drugs, but it's important to mention them. They're only going to get more popular. Like I said, 12% of the US has been on them at one point. And a lot of the reasons people haven't been on them has honestly been cost and access. And if that changes in the future, I think, we could see a world of 30, 40, 50% on some version of these drugs in the US and Canada. So I think it's important that we talk about what they actually do. Even though I'm a weight neutral coach, I think it's important that like we discuss their benefits and like what they're going to mean for fitness in the future. Would love to know your thoughts. And thanks for listening to another episode of the Badass Lifter podcast.